Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to Chef's Apprentice, learning to cook like a pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is Philly cheesesteak. This is my riff on an American classic, the Philadelphia cheesesteak hoagie. This version uses top quality ingredients to create a rich dish reminiscent of the classic. You will gain experience cooking beef to desired doneness and assembling a multi-component dish. You will also use a kitchen torch or broiler to finish the dish. Techniques today are portioning and slicing, seasoning, sauteing, deglazing, adjusting seasoning, and keeping warm, toasting, cooking beef and testing doneness, torching or broiling, and plating. So let's start cooking. All right, let's talk about the mise en place for lesson 63, the Philly cheesesteak. Now the star of this show is the beef. Now this is a New York strip. You want it to be at least 1 inch thick, and cut in and trimmed of all the fat, and then cut into 4 equal pieces. So you can see the size of these. These are probably about 4 inches by 2 inches by about 1 inch thick, and that is going to be a small plate. Actually, it's maybe more like a medium plate. We're going to make one for 8 people. Now I'm only making 4 tonight, so I have 1 steak that I've cut into 4 pieces. Now, in addition to that, we're going to need what would become essentially the roll in a Philly cheesesteak. You can use either English muffin. We're only going to use the bottom of the English muffin. The top half you can save for something else. And or you could use these. I love these brioche, Euro classic brioche rolls from Whole Foods. They are so darn good. I'm going to use those today. And we'll also need some clarified butter. Now I did this, I clarified this butter earlier today. You'll need about 6 tablespoons roughly. It's easier just to do a whole pound of butter actually, and then just have what you need for this preparation. And there's a separate video, bonus video, on how to clarify butter. You'll also need about 2 cups of sweet onions, cipollini onions, any other sweet onion, thinly sliced. We need to have about 1/2 teaspoon of brown sugar. I'm just going to eyeball that when we get to it. About 2/3 of a cup of shredded Gruyere cheese. I shredded it with a box grater, and then I chopped it up a little bit so it's not real long shreds. Then we'll need to have also about 2/3 of a cup of a spreadable cheese. Now I'm going to use goat cheese, Chef, and it needs to be room temperature, but it can be any spreadable cheese. Another great cheese is Brie Savarin. I think we've used it before, and that cheese is very much like butter. I had a little technical difficulty there. As I was saying, you could use also a cheese like Camembert or even Brie. Really any triple cream cheese, spreadable and room temperature. We'll also need to have about 1/4 of a cup of any whiskey. I'm just going to eyeball that when we get to it. And actually, I probably will measure it out for safety's sake. And we'll need some kosher salt and a pepper mill. That's all the ingredients. We'll break. I'll come back. I'll show you the equipment for lesson 63. Okay, for equipment, we'll need a cutting board and a chef's knife. We'll need a slicer to portion the beef. We'll need a box grater to shred the Gruyere cheese. We need to have a saucepan to clarify the butter. And if you do a whole pound, this is a good sized pan to use. And then you'll need the bowl with an ice bath so that you can stop the cooking immediately when the butter gets to be clarified before it starts to brown. And then we'll need to have a saute pan. Now I'm only going to do 4 of these beef portions tonight. So, in fact, I might only do 2. We'll see. So I'm using this size of a saute pan, which I'm going to do the onions in here, and then I'm going to do the beef in here. Now if you're doing all 8, you might want to use a larger pan, and you may also want to work in batches, do 4 and 4. We'll also need to have a ring mold, about 2 3/4 inch ring mold. I highly recommend that you get a set of ring molds. They come in, there's 1, 2, 3, 5 different sizes, very versatile. We use them a lot in this course. And again, about 2 3/4 inch ring mold. You need to have a brush for brushing butter, and we're going to need to have either a sheet pan or sizzle plate. Now I'm only doing a couple of these portions tonight, so I'm only using a sizzle plate, but if you're doing all 8, you'll need to have a sheet pan or a 1/2 sheet pan. Also, highly recommend recommend that you have an instant read thermometer. And this is the Thermapen. I think it's one of the best out there. Takes the guesswork out of knowing when the beef is at the desired level of doneness. Okay, and so we're going to use the Thermapen tonight. And then finally, you'll need to have either a kitchen torch or a broiler in your oven. I'm going to use the broiler on the oven today. Okay, that's all the equipment we need. We'll break, come back, and start cooking. Okay, the first thing on our prep list is to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. All right, the first thing we're going to do is saute these onions, and we're going to do that on medium heat with about 2 tablespoons of the clarified butter. So I'm going to let that melt, then I'll add the onions. Okay, our butter is almost melted there. We're going to add the onions. We're going to add about half a teaspoon of brown sugar. I'm just eyeballing that, using my fingers to measure it. Then we're going to give them a little bit of kosher salt. We want them to be slightly on the salty side because you won't taste that once they become part of the composed dish. Okay, a little bit of ground pepper. Want to get these coated with butter, and we're going to cook these until they are light brown. Okay, our onions are getting to be golden. You know, there's not many too many better smells in the world than onions cooking in butter. Now what we're going to do is reduce this heat just a little bit, and now we're going to deglaze it with the whiskey. Now I've measured out the whiskey, putting it in the pan. Now, we can flame it like that and just let it burn, let the alcohol burn out, or you don't have to do that. We did this in a prior lesson, you have to be very careful, but you don't have to do that. You can just pour it in and let it evaporate. The alcohol will evaporate out, and you want to let it reduce until the onions are just wet. Okay, then we're going to put them onto a sizzle plate and keep them warm until we're ready to plate up. All right, now we're going to portion the roll or the bread portion of this dish. Now I'm using these brioches and I'm cutting the tops off. I'm leaving the bottoms kind of thick, as you can see. They're about 1 inch thick. And the tops we'll just save for some other purpose. And then we're going to use the ring mold and we're going to cut these into circles. Now, you're going to have some scraps. I'm going to save those for some other purpose as well. I don't like to waste them. At the very least, the birds could have them, but these are too tasty to give to the birds, I think. Okay, so there we have our 2 bottoms. Now, if you're doing this with English muffins, you'd use the bottom of the English muffin and keep the top for some other purpose, like breakfast, and then also cut the English muffin into about this size, if it's not already about this size. Okay, I have some of the clarified butter. Now, you know, you'll need about 2 tablespoons if you are doing 8, but I'm only doing 2 tonight, so I'm only using a part of that. And I'm brushing the tops of these cut brioches. Now, if I were using English muffins instead of these brioches, I would butter the bottom of them, the bottom of the English muffin, after you cut off the top and portion it if it needs to be portioned. And so we're going to just brush these with a little bit of the butter on top. Now we're going to put these onto a sizzle plate, and we're going to put these into the oven and toast them till we get them to be slightly crispy on top. So we just have to keep an eye on them. When they're slightly crispy, we'll take them out. Okay, our bread has been toasted. It took about 10 minutes at 350 degrees, but you know, it's going to depend upon your oven. Then we want to put the soft cheese, the spreadable cheese, down onto this toasted bread. And you know how much? An amount that looks good, okay? And so you want to spread it on there. This sizzle plate is hot, so I'm being careful here, okay? And we're going to put this back in the oven till it's just melty. Now that's probably only going to take a very short time because these brioches are already pretty hot. Okay, I'm adding just a little bit more. I like the idea of having a little bit more on there. Okay, good. All right, back into the oven, probably for just a minute or two. Okay, now these were only in the oven for about a minute to get this cheese to be kind of melty. It's going to depend on what kind of cheese you use. If you use brie or camembert, it's going to take a bit longer. With this room temperature goat cheese, didn't take very long at all. All right, so we're going to keep these warm until we're ready to plate. All right, now we are going to season the beef. Now, as I said, I'm only making 2 small plates tonight rather than 8. But the amounts that I've given you in the description and in the mise en place portion of this video, those are correct for 8. So you can scale them down if you want to do less. Or you can do larger portions and use the same amount. Okay, so we're going to do salt and pepper, pat it in. Okay, there we go. Okay, now it's time to cook the beef. We're going to use the same pan that we used for the onions. And again, why are we doing that? We're layering flavor, insaporire, the Italian term that I butcher. We're going to give it medium heat. We already have some butter in the pan from when we did the onions, so we're not going to add as much as we would if it were a dry pan. I'm doing 2 portions, so I'm adding probably it's probably a little less than a tablespoon. But if you're doing 8, you'll need some more. You know, you want to make sure that the bottom of the pan is well covered with the butter. Let it melt. When it starts to shimmer a little bit, it's ready. Or when it just slightly starts to smoke. Why are we using clarified butter? Higher smoke point. You can get it hotter without it burning. Okay, we're going to add our room temperature beef to the butter. And we're gonna, it depends on how thick your beef is, okay? So that's why we're gonna use an instant read thermometer. This I'm gonna do about a minute and a half per side. 125 to 135 is rare, 135 to 140 is medium. I'm gonna go for rare to start and let it rest. All right, it's been about a minute and a half, and I'm going to turn them, let them go for a minute and a half more. Now, you know, you're going to have to learn judgment on this. It's usually about 3 minutes per side for something that's about 1.5 inches thick. This is about half that thickness, so I'm doing about a minute and a half per side. Again, we're going to use the instant read thermometer to get a reading on it. And you can always add more time, okay? So it's better to cook it less time and come back and give it some more later if you need it, rather than overcooking it. Okay, it's been a minute and a half on this side. We're going to take these out of the pan, let them rest for about the same amount of time that we cooked them on the 2 sides. So about 3 minutes, we're going to let them rest in a warm spot. Okay, they've been resting, and now we're going to check the temperature. And the temperature is 124, 125. So they are slightly less cooked than I'd like them to be. I'm going to put them back on for just a very short period of time. I'm going to get the pan hot first, though. Medium heat. Now, I may have misspoken before. I meant to say that rare is 125 to 35, and I think I said that correctly. And then I meant to say medium rare is 135 to 140. I might have said that's medium. Okay, so we're gonna let this get hot. We're gonna put those back in there for probably just about 30 seconds per side. Okay, our butter is hot. We're putting them back in for about 30 seconds per side. Okay, I'm going to remove them from the heat, turn the heat off, and put them back onto my resting sizzle plate. Then we're going to check the temperature. I'm not going to put them on this heat though, okay? Now, normally we don't check temperature until they rest because we don't want the juices to run out. But we already have the hole where we tested them before, so we're going to put the instant read in there. We have 134. Okay, perfect. And now we're going to put these in a warm spot, and we're going to go and plate up. All right, now would be the time to turn on your broiler. Now, if you have a separate broiler, separate from the oven, you can turn it on earlier. But if you have a, if you only have the broiler that's in your oven, then turn it on now. Okay, now it's time to plate up. Now if we had thicker pieces of beef, I would cut them in half horizontally, and then I would put the onions between them. Now these pieces are not that thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the onions down on the brioche base, okay? And now again, you know, if you're, I've said this many times before, but if you're making, depending on how many you're making, you have to make sure that you split your onions equally among as many as you're making, okay? Then we're going to add the beef. Remember, if this beef had been thicker, I would have sliced it, put the onions in between the layers. Now we're going to put the Gruyere cheese on top. Nice mound of it. Now we're going to put this under the broiler until it is just melty. Okay, they were just under the broiler for probably about a minute, okay? We don't want to overcook the beef, but we just want to melt the cheese, all right? All right, so there we have it. This is the conclusion of lesson 63, the Philly cheesesteak. You can see photos of the final dish on my Instagram, which is @ChefsApprentice, Cook Like a Pro. Next up is sea scallop with cured ham and almond wine sauce. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.